Breaking news. A stunning and memorable account of reporting from some of the most dangerous places in the world. By Martin Fletcher. Narrated by Stephen Hoye. Copyright 2008 by Martin Fletcher. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Thomas Dunn Books, an imprint of St. Martin's Press, and was produced in the year 2008 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Introduction. The phone rang at noon, and the message was brief. "Is that NBC? Tell Martin to come to a wedding. Tell him to come now. He can be a witness. Goodbye." I didn't rush out to buy a present. This was no invitation to join a happy couple in holy matrimony. This wedding was more like a funeral. The message was code to witness a murder. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade in Nablus were going to kill a collaborator, and they wanted me and my NBC News team to film it. Later I would get the details, and what a murky tale it was. The Israeli Secret Service had blackmailed a Palestinian man into becoming an informer. They knew he was having an affair with a married woman. The woman was married to a fighter with the Al-Aqsa Brigades, who was hiding out in the Balata refugee camp with one of the top Al-Aqsa commanders. The Israelis wanted to kill them both. The woman wanted to marry her lover, so she betrayed the hiding place of her husband and the militant leader. Israeli commandos stormed the safe house and found them crammed behind a false wall in a small room. In a hail of gunfire, the militants were killed. Case closed. But Al-Aqsa knew there must have been a collaborator, and they quickly found him. And her. They videotaped their confessions against a plain white wall. The wedding was payback time. When I got the call, I was shaken. How many dead people did I need to see? And I was confused. I understood Al-Aqsa's rationale. The collaborators must be killed, or they'll betray more people, and next time we'll be killed. It's them or us. But I also understood the collaborators. We have no life under the Israelis. Our lives are ruined whatever we do. And I understood the Israelis. Anything goes to stop the suicide bombers from killing more Jewish children. We're fighting a war. As I put the phone down, I thought, I understand too much. I feel sorry for them all. But it occurred to me, if I sympathize with killers, informers, and blackmailers, maybe there's something wrong with me, too. It wouldn't be surprising. After 3 decades covering war and suffering in every dark corner of the globe, anyone's brain would be fried. So, what should I do? Film the killing or not? I sat down and stared at the phone, wondering whether to summon the team and hit the road. Ethically, it was a no-brainer. No way am I going to witness a murder. But hey, I thought, it's going to happen anyway. If I'm there or not, it's not my fault. And this is my job. Nobody owns the moral high ground. My role in life is to see and report, and maybe learn a little. So there I sat, looking at the phone and needing to decide quickly. Should we go film the murder? This book is not a meditation on society, or a rant about how bad TV journalism has become, or a tell-all account of famous people I've met. It's something simpler, and I hope more revealing, a series of true-life adventure stories that expose the haunting dilemmas journalists face as we help write that famous first draft of history. Year after year, my work takes me to the world's most beautiful places at the worst of times. I visit with people at their lowest moments and tell their stories as best I can, while trying to cast light on the larger issues. At a time when the problems of strangers seem a world away, I try to answer the question, why should we care? Sometimes the pictures tell the story. Sometimes a word or two, artfully mixed with a surprising juxtaposition, does the job. Usually you can't do better than let a person reveal himself. But however I do it, my job is to help people care about other people. Unfortunately, this isn't as morally clear-cut as it sounds. My work has led me again and again into pretty dicey territory. For instance, how callous can one be as a journalist seeking a story? I face that conundrum every day, and haven't always handled it with flying colours. When Turkey invaded Cyprus in 1974, my soundman trod on a landmine just 3 feet from me and was killed in the explosion. Moments later, another of my good friends trod on another landmine and vanished in flame and smoke. When I overcame my astonishment that I was still alive, I realized I had filmed it all. I hadn't helped. In a refugee camp in Wad Kauli on the Sudan border, I saw a man holding his starving infant. I happened to look into his eyes at the very moment he glanced down and realized that his child had just died in his arms. The man looked up, and our eyes met. Tears sprang to his eyes, as they did to mine. After all, at that time I had a child the same age as his. But I didn't move forward to comfort him or even make a consoling gesture. As the man began to wail and stumbled away with his dead infant, I instinctively rushed off to find my cameraman and told him to follow the guy until he buried the kid. Great sequence. In Cyprus I was filming people in a deep ditch digging out a mass grave. Parts of stiff bodies stuck out of the packed mud in grotesque poses, like one of those artworks where a head and chest emerge from a wall. Everything was grey and dark and monotone, and my only response as they uncovered a woman's body was to think, "Oh, good, she's got a red dress on, some colour for the picture." Getting a good story while maintaining one's humanity is difficult, yet it is hardly the only ethical challenge I've faced. For instance, how polite should I be when interviewing someone responsible for killing up to 2 million Cambodians? Is it wrong to stay in the home of a brutal Somali warlord, eating lavish food prepared by his Italian-trained chef, in order to report on, among other things, his theft of the same food from international aid organizations? And critically, for a young man with a growing family, how can one witness every imaginable horror and not take it out on the wife and kids? This book does not offer solutions to these dilemmas, because there aren't any. All you can do is feel your way as best you can. And yet, if I continue to cover wars after all these years, it is because I believe that, all things considered, I've done more good than harm. Given the great challenges facing humanity today, as well as all the mindless distractions that impede us, it's critical to remind ourselves of what's really important: human beings, and the dire struggles for survival so many face every day. And that's what war correspondents do. The adventures in this audiobook will, I hope, offer hours of entertainment. Yet I will have failed if, in the very process of capturing listeners' imaginations, I have not also left them with a keener and more visceral sense of the world's pain. I will have failed if listeners do not feel a new gratitude for the blessings they already enjoy, a sense that, as bad as life may be, it could always be a lot worse. That, in the end, is what I take away from all these years of murder and mayhem, which made me a connoisseur of sorrow. I dedicate breaking news to my father, a reader, who knew great sorrow. He would suck mints, stroke his Snoopy doll, and doze off among piles of open books. He would dip in and out of volumes on comparative religion, European history, modern psychology, Talmudic thought, fiction by Oscar Wilde and Goethe, and plays by Molière and Aristophanes, reading all in their original languages, including Greek. He wasn't a great listener, though, and he wasn't too much troubled by the kinds of professional dilemmas I face. Whenever he asked me about the war in Kosovo or revolution in Iran or wherever I had just returned from, he would quickly interrupt and correct me based on his vast knowledge of history, the editorials of the right-wing English press, and the philosophy of Attila the Hun. His solution to most conflicts was the same: line up 500 men, shoot them, end of problem. His idea of a compromise was, okay, 300. When I tried to respond, he would nod for a minute, then in mid-sentence remove his hearing aid and pick up a book. Interview over. Unfortunately, my father didn't live long enough to know about this book, let alone spill coffee on it. Within 2 short years my brother Peter died of leukemia. Next my mother died following an operation. And then, about a year later, my father willed himself to death at the age of 90. All this took place during the years 2000 through 2002, at the height of the Second Intifada. Between suicide bombs and carnage in Israel, I flew to London, helping my dwindling family through sicknesses, intensive care, and funerals. Between reports for NBC, I wrote eulogies for my family members. My bosses were sympathetic, offering me all the free time I needed, for which I am grateful. But I was so swept along by the drama around me, at work and at home, that I had no time to mourn or reflect. My father, a young lawyer, fled Vienna after escaping from a Nazi jail in 1938. 9 years later, 2 months after I was born in London, he changed his name to George Fletcher from George Fleischer, so that I wouldn't get saddled with his English nickname, Fleischit. When he discovered that Fletcher was an ancient Scottish name meaning arrow-maker, and that it was linked to the MacGregor clan, he bought a tartan tie and wore it to work at the button factory. He tried to blend in with the British, but couldn't. He never overcame the loss of his large extended family in the Holocaust. Only he, a sister, and a niece survived. Nor did my mother, who along with her sister was her family's sole survivor. After 60 years living in London, all their friends were from Central Europe. They were still refugees at heart, and they passed some of it on. When I was mocked in first grade for calling corn on the cob cucaroots, the Hungarian word we used at home, I told my tormentor to humpfingach, Viennese dialect for take a flying jump. I squirmed in embarrassment when my parents spoke in their thick Viennese accents to my English schoolteachers. I always felt something of an outsider, even as I progressed through school, captained the soccer team, and worked at the BBC. It wasn't England's fault. England had sheltered Jewish refugees in their direst moment, but the burden of the Holocaust was too great for my parents, and they unloaded some of it onto me, a certain buried sadness, hatred for bullies, and sympathy for their victims. But one man in his time plays many parts, and it is only looking back that I see the connection between this inheritance and my career. I left the University of Bradford with a degree in modern languages, and the offer of a job as a translator-interpreter in the Brussels headquarters of the European Community. It was the top of the translator's ladder and paid a high salary, almost tax-free. It also offered all the perks befitting an international civil servant. I could have had a cushy life, but instead I chose to roam the world, look for faults everywhere I went, speak rudely to people in authority, and evade responsibility at every turn. In short, I became a journalist. It took me a long time to understand why the glove fits so well. I am proud to say that I have rarely interviewed a head of state or a chief executive officer. I don't care what the generals have to say. And don't get me started on the royal family. Nobody with a story to sell or a policy to spin interests me. What I care about are the people who pay the price, as my family did. On the day that I write this, I spent an hour with a man and woman whose 10-year-old daughter was killed. They showed me her school dress, ripped and red with blood, which they keep wrapped in a shopping bag in their neighbor's apartment because they can't bear to keep it at home. It isn't clear who killed their daughter or why, but they want justice. I'm not a cop. I can't find out the answers, but I can help them ask the questions and let them know that the world cares. Chapter 1. Clueless. Today, when I watch reality shows like Survivor or Fear Factor, I have to chuckle. You think building a hut or sticking your head in a tub of worms is hard? Try treading through a minefield in Cyprus moments after your friend was blown up, or trekking through the Hindu Kush Mountains into Afghanistan with the anti-Soviet Mujahideen, or sweeping through southern Zaire with the French Foreign Legion. When you are a war correspondent, the game you play goes like this. If you lose, you die, and if you win, you get to do it again, and again, and again. and watch as friends die until you die, or retire. Every foreign correspondent I know can name half a dozen friends, at least, who have died on the job. Most would admit that it is all a matter of luck. As far as survival is concerned, you don't get better at being a war correspondent, you just keep getting lucky. Experience doesn't matter. My two most experienced friends, Neil Davis in Asia and Mohammed Amin in Africa, each a legend for his decades of frontline reporting, finally died in the silliest ways. Neil was killed by shrapnel from a tank shell fired in an immediately forgotten coup attempt in Thailand. Mo first lost an arm in a bomb explosion in Ethiopia, then died in a hijacked plane that crashed into the Indian Ocean. My old mate Alan Pitsey, the CBS correspondent who knows the field as well as anyone, put it this way, after two CBS friends were killed by a roadside bomb blast in Baghdad, and another correspondent was badly wounded. For journalists who cover wars, luck is like a blind trust fund. You can make withdrawals, but not deposits, and you have no idea how much is left. You don't study to be a foreign correspondent. You just do it, and grow into the role. My own introduction to war came suddenly, with no learning curve. I began in the deep end, literally. It was a hot Saturday, and I was swimming 100 yards off the Hilton Beach in Tel Aviv, doing a leisurely backstroke in the glare of the Mediterranean sun, wondering what had happened to my new friends Hugh Alexander, a UPI news photographer, and his Israeli girlfriend, Batia Grafka. We were supposed to meet at midday, and they were more than an hour late. Hugh was a Gentile, and Batia a hilarious, godless Jewess. I knew almost nothing could stop them from enjoying the quiet of Yom Kippur on the beach. 2 nights earlier I had dined with one of the Israeli army spokesmen, Captain Amnon Paldi, whose family manufactured clothes for Marks & Spencer. He talked in passing about the chances of war, but with no sense of urgency. None of us at the table knew that the Israeli army would declare a general alert the next day, Friday, October 5th, 1973. They called it a precautionary measure in the face of exercises by the Syrian and Egyptian armies. War? The new Israeli army head of intelligence called the chance remote. Since I had recently arrived in Israel, Captain Paldi's aside that he would be spending Yom Kippur in his army office didn't ring any alarm bells. But now, floating on my back, languidly enjoying the midday sun upon my face, it suddenly all added up. Amnon sleeping in his office, Hugh, a UPI photographer, not showing up, those planes I'd heard flying along the coast during the night of Yom Kippur. War, it had to be. Nothing else would have stopped Hugh coming to the beach on this day. I rolled over and struck out for shore. I ran to my clothes, slipped on my sandals, and, still dripping, raced past sunbathers and up the steps to Hayarkan Street. Already I saw the first signs. There were cars on the street, unheard of on this one holy day of the year when driving in Israel is forbidden. Uniformed men carrying guns and helmets lined the road, waiting for lifts to the front. Egypt wouldn't open fire at the Suez Canal until 1:55 p.m., but word was already out. Soldiers were to join their units immediately. Israeli intelligence had warned the government overnight that Egypt and Syria would invade that day at 6 p.m. The army had ordered a partial call-up of reserves, and the Air Force had demanded a preemptive strike against enemy airfields, which had worked so brilliantly for Israel in 1967. But Prime Minister Golda Meir rejected the general's advice and went with her political advisers. They believed it imperative that Israel should appear to have been surprised. The country would need to absorb the enemy's first blow if it was to keep American support for the rest of the war. Israel must not look as if it had started the fighting, as it had 6 years earlier. So when war erupted, the only real surprise for Israel was that the attack came at 1:55, 4 hours earlier than predicted. I ran past the soldiers and down Jabotinsky to my flat at 224 Dizengoff. The nephew of my colleague Rolf Neller stood at my door, ringing the bell. "War!" he shouted when I turned the corner. "We're at war!" "Who with?" I shouted back. I was clueless. I'd arrived in the country less than a week earlier and moved into my apartment the day before. It was a fancy place, with 2 bedrooms, air conditioning, and a large living room with a glass door leading onto a terrace. My biggest dilemma so far was where to buy shower curtains. War? What did I know from war? "Call Rolf," he said. "He'll tell you what to do." Then he ran off to join his army unit. I took the stairs 2 at a time, put my spare camera batteries on charge, and phoned Rolf in Jerusalem. "Go to the Golan Heights. I'll come down to the studios," he said. "Don't waste any time. You must go now." What was he talking about? What should I do on the Golan? He just said there was a war. It seemed dangerous. Anyway, I had another question. "Where are the Golan Heights?" "Ach, du lieber Gott!" I told Rolf dear God couldn't help me now. What I needed was a road map. But in fact I needed far more than that. I had never worked as a war correspondent. I hadn't even been a Boy Scout, let alone had military training. The nearest I had been to combat was playing soccer in London. I didn't know the roads or the people or even the issues. Why was Israel suddenly at war? I had no idea. War hadn't been on my mind when I stepped off the boat in Haifa in October 1973. I was a 26-year-old news agency cameraman with only the slimmest of journalist credentials. 2 years earlier I had bluffed my way into becoming one of the youngest writers ever on the staff of BBC Television News in London. I was on the fast track, but it didn't take me long to realize I was headed in the wrong direction. The post of writer was an in-house job that led to production and management. I never wanted to produce a show or be an anchor. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. Those were 2 magic words to me, glamorous and exciting and full of promise. Free travel. I have to admit that I was not a young man with a mission to save the world. Rather, I wanted to save money and see the world. I could not have been more naive about the misery and the hardship I would witness and the toll they would take. In the BBC newsroom I felt hopelessly bored. A dozen journalists sat around a large U-shaped table, each with a more senior person to his right. As the junior sub-editor on the flagship broadcast, the 9 o'clock news, I sat at the far left. Next to me sat the sub-editor. On his right toiled the senior sub-editor, and so on, until opposite me sat the assistant editor who ran the show. Each person was about 3 years older than the man on his left. If I plodded on, I could maybe sit opposite myself in another 18 years. On one particularly black day, when I got a soccer score wrong, and most of England phoned to complain, Derek Maud, the assistant editor, took me to task. "Fuck me, Fletcher," he yelled. "You'll never be a journalist." Maud wore an eye patch, but you can hardly say he lacked vision. After a year of frustration and insults from Maud, I decided I couldn't wait any longer to get into the field. I didn't have the patience to train to be a BBC reporter, and it wasn't clear I'd ever have the opportunity anyway, so I made a choice only the young would dare to make. While studying books on film, light and sound that I borrowed from the local library, I talked Viz News, the world's largest news film agency, into lending me a film camera. 3 months later, Viz News agreed to take a gamble and send me out in the field as a cameraman. Despite the considerable drop in status and salary, I handed a 1-line resignation note to the Beeb and never looked back. My first foreign assignment for Viz News was to replace their Brussels veteran, Maurice DeWitt, an 82-year-old cameraman who wore a suit and tie on every assignment and brought along his black miniature poodle on a red leash. He was a dear old man, but angry at being replaced, and he couldn't have been more delighted when I blew my first job. It was the first day of British membership in the European Community, and the best way to illustrate this for television was to film the Union Jack being hoisted for the first time alongside all the other national flags at the entrance to the EC headquarters. It was my first ever job as a cameraman, and I got there too late. I missed the story. I think a girl was involved. Morris was delighted. Maybe this young whippersnapper would not be shunting him off into early retirement after all. What Morris didn't know was that 3 years earlier I had interned for 6 months as a languages translator at Berlaymont, the star-shaped community headquarters building in front of which the British flag now limply hung. Showing the rat-like cunning that one famous British reporter, Nicholas Tomlin, called the key requirement of journalists, I went straight to the office of the chief doorman. Fortunately, he remembered me. To Morris's consternation, I persuaded the man to lower the flag and raise it again for me, while I filmed the historic moment Redux. Today I could be fired for that. Then it may have saved my job. Morris finally understood that it was time to move aside graciously for the new generation, and my career was born. As it turned out, though, I was far from happy. In Brussels I suffered more than in London, barely emerging into daylight, filming stuffy committee meetings and conferences in the European Community headquarters. Overheated rooms, cigar smoke, muscles, and beer were about all I knew of working in the field. 9 months later, when Viz News appointed me bureau chief in Israel, I was delighted. I rushed to share the good news with a new friend, the Israeli TV correspondent in Brussels. Ron Ben Yishai tried hard to dissuade me. "This is where the excitement is, here in Brussels," Ron told me. "The struggle for a united Europe. Don't go to Israel. It's too quiet there. The story's over." He should know, I thought. Ron was an Israeli paratrooper, a former military correspondent for Israeli television and a rising media star. But I'd had my fill of winter in Europe and bitter clashes among commission bureaucrats over controversial farming issues like how many hens a cock should mate with a day, 10 or 12. I decided to move on to warmer and more peaceful climes. That September, Israel was in a summer stupor. The temperature was in the 90s. The glory of its stunning victory over 3 Arab armies in 6 days in June 1967 had led to social complacency, military arrogance, and 6 years on, political inertia. Israel was resting on its laurels. And so I arrived on October 1st, 1973, with little on my mind beyond sunny days and sultry girls. 5 days later, Egypt and Syria invaded. The next time I saw Ron Ben Yishai was 2.5 weeks into the war, on the Egyptian side of the Suez Canal. He drove a military jeep and wore paratrooper gear. His face was blackened with smoke and grime, and an Uzi submachine gun was slung across his chest. He grinned sheepishly. "Well, maybe the story isn't over yet," he said. Nobody understood why Viz News decided to assign me to Israel. Least of all Rolf Neller, who had been the Viz News man there for decades. As far as he was concerned, I was just a young pest who threatened his job. He had sent a series of nasty letters to management asking why they were being so considerate as to finally send him help after having overworked and underpaid him for so many years. What was the real reason behind my arrival, he wondered, and as bureau chief no less? New? What did Fletcher know from Israel? Clearly, not a lot. Now, putting such resentments aside, Rolf impatiently explained how to get to the Golan. "Drive northeast," he said. North, I knew, but east was a problem. "Ach, just follow the cars. They're all going to the Golan." I hopped into my proudest possession at the time, a Mazda RX-2. It was a sleek orange sports coupe with spider wheels and a rotary engine, the only one of its kind in Israel. The rotary engine was incredibly fast and quiet. I'd driven the Mazda from Brussels to Marseille, then crossed the Mediterranean by boat to Haifa with a trunkload of spare parts. Now my main concern as I drove past citizen soldiers kissing their families and heading to war, as I passed people painting their car headlights blue for the blackouts, and as I hid in a storefront when the air raid siren sounded, was my car. If it got damaged, I wondered, would Viz News pay? Luckily, I had a full tank of fuel, and by now my camera batteries were partially charged. I got lost a few times and spent hours crawling in traffic jams, but by the next morning I was approaching the Golan Heights. The first days, when Israel was almost defeated, I couldn't get close to the action and didn't really want to. The roads were clogged with private cars carrying soldiers and their gear, giant flatbed trucks transporting desperately needed tanks and armored personnel carriers, long columns trundling up the narrow, winding roads from Lake Galilee and Kiryat Shemona, and me in my orange Mazda, along with dozens of other pressmen. After 3 days of filming the Israeli build-up on the ground and warplanes screeching overhead, I finally made it to the height.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?